All right, so today we're going to look at field lighting and talk about some things that you can do with just a couple of small strobes or even larger lights, but just out in the field in the wild. Now, we have worked in the studio a little bit, and the studio is a great place to work. But when you work in a studio, there are a lot of limitations that you have to deal with, but those limitations also come with some consistency and some ease. But when you take those lights and you take those techniques and you move them out into the wild, I think that's when things get really interesting. I'm going to show you some examples of some photos that I've made in the past for newspapers, magazines, things like that, with just one or two strobes, like most of them are small speed lights, some of them are larger lights, kind of like the studio lights that we were using. Some of them are a blending of both. Some of them are using a reflector and a speed light. So it's kind of going to be a few different things. So this image is the first image that I shot using some off-camera lighting outdoors in the field somewhere. This picture kind of started a journey for me of like supplementing my gear with a couple of small flashes, and those small flashes opened up a whole world of things that I could do that I couldn't do before. If you see this picture here, there's a light kind of facing her all the way out, and then there's one directly behind her, and they're kind of going front and back. And what that does is it allows me to actually underexpose the background a little bit and then bring up my main lights to expose her properly, and it also freezes her in midair with that instant flash. And using really hard light, it sculpts her arms, her legs, all those things. And this is really the first one that I did for a newspaper. And as I would shoot assignments and shoot portraits and things out in the field, I realized, just having even one light makes a huge difference. So in this picture, I had a DSLR and actually had a cable that attached to a flash, and had a small softbox on that flash. And so I would hold the softbox up and to the right with one hand. I actually kind of did it like this. I shot with the camera on my face and then my hand over to the side holding the light, and then pop that flash in to illuminate him. You can see the catch light in his eyes. You can see his body is lit by that flash with the little softbox on there. It's not very soft. It's a pretty small box, so you still have a little bit of harsh shadows. But what that enabled me to do is for that story, when I was there shooting, I noticed that the skies were really stormy and kind of the clouds were clumpy, and I thought it would be kind of interesting if I could darken the skies and darken the background. So again, I underexposed the background a bit and then brought him up with my flash, and that gave the image a little bit more drama. Here's a picture of a softball player, and believe it or not, I didn't use any strobes for this one. This is done with just I think a 3 or 4 foot reflector, just a bounce reflector that I've shown you all in the past. It works great. Like, I hung it on a light stand, clamped it to make sure it wouldn't move, and then had her put the sun to her back, and then used that reflector to fill in. And other than it being really hard on her eyes, as you can see, her eyes are a little bit squinted. That is one downside with using a reflector, but you get a similar quality of light if you're using a strobe or a flash with an umbrella or with a softbox or a softer light source. Here's another picture that I don't know that it was necessarily that successful, but kind of the idea, once I got bored with just using a flash, I wanted to kind of push it a little more. And in this picture, I got them to turn all the lights off in the gym, and I set up a couple of lights. And what I did was I put my camera on a tripod, and instead of shooting a picture, I used a long exposure, just like when you all were doing light painting. And I used my trigger that usually I would be on my camera, and I held up my hand, and as she would dribble the ball, I would use a long exposure, and I would flash every time she would move, pop, 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 and it would burn, her into the image. And then we would just do that over and over until I got an image that looked kind of more of what I wanted. It would be more successful if the background had been totally black and totally dark, so that way you could get more separation. But the idea was that she was extremely good, offensive player, and could get around almost anyone on the court. And she went on to play, I think, for UT Martin, and did really, really well in college. But I wanted to show kind of like that movement and the unpredictability of her. And, I don't know if the image was necessarily successful, but having an understanding of how, using a strobe works, or using a flash, how you can manipulate your image, it gave me a lot more opportunities to experiment. In this picture, this was one of the more challenging pictures, just because I had a large studio light with a large softbox, and I had a big battery pack, and we carried it through a cornfield because where she played tennis was, her family had actually built a tennis court in the middle of a cornfield. And so you're driving down this road and it's just corn, and then it opens up and there's a tennis court. So I thought it'd be interesting to place her in the middle of this cornfield. And I just boomed the softbox up really high. You can see it's really hot because she's sweating. I was sweating as well. It was the middle of the summer. But because the sun was like almost right overhead, the light was really horrible looking. So by bringing my own strobe, my own flash, I could, throw the light where I wanted it to be and illuminate her face in the way that I wanted, our face to be illuminated. In this one, it's similar kind of to the first picture that I showed you guys, where there's a light kind of completely on either side. It's almost past her, shooting, directly at her. And it's almost the same type of picture, just a different context. It's an action photo using the strobe to freeze some of the action, and to, give this kind of dramatic shape. Here's a picture that I think this may just be one. Yeah, I think that's just one. There might be another kicker, just a really light flash to the back. I think it's probably like one main key light, kind of a soft box or an umbrella to the right, and then I think I'm kicking a little bit of light to the back side of his leg as well. And this one, it's just really simple, just a big soft box, and you can see how that light rolls off of his face, off of his arms, how those catch lights in his eyes are really important. It gives a little depth. And I, at this point in my career, I was like a newspaper photographer for a couple of years, and I photographed a lot of athletes, a lot of student athletes, and working with high school kids that have, most of them, never been photographed before, was always a challenge. And so by bringing lights and like really upping the production value of it, it gave me a certain confidence that I could produce a controlled, dynamic image and spend more of my time considering how I'm going to interact with that person to get, some sort of reaction or, something out of them to make the picture work for the newspaper. This one is a little different. This group actually approached me about doing a picture similar to a picture that they pull off the internet from like Mad Men or something, and I just gone purely freelance, so I had very limited equipment. I just had two flashes, two little strobes, and I had two little strobes and like two umbrellas and two stands, and that was all I had. And I knew that like I had to make this as dynamic as possible, and make the lighting look as kind of cinematic as possible, if it even does that. But the problem was, to get all of them in the frame, I would have to scoot my lights back really, really far, and it would just there would be almost no drama to the picture. It would just kind of be like light blasted everywhere. So instead, this is actually a composited picture. What I would do is I got my frame with my camera, like I looked to the viewfinder and got the frame that I wanted, put my camera on the tripod and locked it down and pre-focused to make sure everything was locked down. And then I would bring in one or two people at a time and set them. So if I started to the left with the lady and the man, I would set them down and I would set up the two lights to light them appropriately and get those lights as close to them as possible, so it would have really like soft, a really nice soft quality of light. And you would see the lights in the picture. And I would move over to the next guy, I'd put him in there, I'd move the lights around, and I would just light him. I would go to the next lady, just light her, the next guy, just light him, the last two guys, light both of them at the same time. And then I would take all those pictures and I would composite them, I would cut them out and piece them together as one singular picture with no lights in the picture. And that would give it the appearance of that I was using, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 10 or 11 lights, when really I just had 2 lights. So you have to be crafty when you don't have a lot of resources. This was a fun one. This is Dan at the Co, and we were experimenting doing I did a series of portraits of different people that worked at the Co, and we just had some beadboard, and I put a flash behind him, and then we had a hazer machine, like a fog machine, and I put another couple of lights in front of him. I think this may be 3 lights possibly, or maybe it's a light behind him, a light to one side, and a reflector to the other side. It's been a long time, I can't remember now, but added the haze just to give it, a different dynamic. This one was Courtney Searcy, who's now in charge of our Jackson home, and this is that clamshell setup just in the field, so I had her handwrite on a chalkboard, so she actually made the background, and then I put a softbox over the top and then a reflector. So this is really just one light with the reflector, and did the clamshell lighting where the reflector's on the bottom, big softbox on the top. It's a really simple, easy, nice setup for, like a kind of a tighter portrait. Here's the guy that we saw. We saw him earlier. I think this might have been the year before, maybe, or maybe it was the year after. I don't remember now. And this one is it's real simple. We were in a really tight locker space. So I had one flash just popping right on his face, and I had one actually behind him to light up that haze. And at that time I had it was like spray paint, but it was haze in a can, and it was like smoke in a can. You could spray it and it would create fog in the room, which was nice because you could put it in your camera bag and then pull it out for like a shoot like this and spray the room. So this guy's probably like 6 or 8 inches taller than me, so I had to stand on a chair to get eye level with him. So I would jump down, I would spray the haze in the room so that the light would pick up and shape that haze in the background, and then jump up really fast and take a picture of his face. That was a little crazy, but it made a more dynamic image with just me. It was just me with a couple little flashes and a spray paint can of haze. Here's another one. This is a coach, and the idea in this one was I kind of wanted for it to appear like there was kind of like a sunset happening out of a window to the left, when there's no windows in this locker room. So on the right side, there's just probably a softbox or an umbrella with a flash there. And then on the left far side of the room, I took an orange gel, which is just a transparent material that has a certain color. So it's a CTO, which is color temperature orange, and I put it over the flash. So whenever I blasted that flash through there with that hard light, it would cast that kind of like really warm glow, to sculpt all the details of the locker room in the background. This one was done with a single flash to the right, and then we actually he was standing on a table or something in front of a projector, and it projected all these designs in like code. This is a guy that does code, and so we just got like a screen grab of some code and then projected it with a digital projector on the background and on him, and then I filled in his face with another flash just to, this is again those portraits I was doing for the Co at the time. And here's one of the last kind of like sports portraits that I made years ago whenever I was freelancing for the newspaper, something a little quieter. And this is, again, it's real simple. It's just 2 lights. There's one to the left that's illuminating his face, and then there's one to the right that has a blue gel on it to give it kind of that cool color, and a little bit of haze, a little bit of fog in the room, so just to give the room a little bit of texture, not a lot. And just 2 lights, a little transparent gel and a little bit of haze, and turn the lights off in the ambient light, turn it down, and there's your picture. So working in the field with field light like doing field lighting, the difference from like working in a studio is that you're combating a lot of other variables. In the studio, you turn the lights off, you turn your strobes on, you're good. You have a lot of control. But when you're working either outside, or if you're working, in a locker room or a conference room or wherever you have to make pictures, you have other sources of light around you. You have other, like backgrounds, you have wall colors that are certain things, you have ceiling that's a certain height. So there's a lot of limitations, but you can utilize those limitations to make the picture more dynamic, and like you can utilize the light that's already there. And so I've told you kind of generally how I do this, but I want you to watch this this video of this guy using a really basic setup of just using a strobe in the field and taking a picture, just a really basic portrait. But watch how he actually balances his light and the sun. So the great thing about using a flash is that if you have one that's powerful enough, you can actually compete with the brightness of the sun. And so even if the light's really, really bad, if you bring your own light, you can make a really dynamic picture. So this is like a 15-minute tutorial video. So jump up and watch that and then come back to me. Okay. So that's a really basic setup. That's basically the stuff that I would do on a regular basis in the field, except I didn't have anybody to videotape me while I was doing it all those years ago, and even now for this lecture. So that's a really basic thing. Now, if you manage to up your game and add more lights or more powerful lights, you can do some really interesting stuff, some really dynamic stuff. So this is a portrait that was made of Anthony Davis, in which they decided they wanted to photograph him as if he was slam dunking the sun. And this is, I think the photographer's name is Dustin Snipes. So watch this really quick video just to see the type of power that you have when you have enough light. So check that out real fast. Okay, so I hope that kind of gives you some context of why it's important to learn how to use flash, how to use strobe, how to use speed lights in the field. And I would say if you have a reflector, if you've already invested in a reflector, that would be one of my first investments when it comes to lighting gear, is a halfway decent reflector. They're not that expensive. And then when you're ready to move up from there, maybe you want to get a little speed light or a little flash. You can get ones that are really basic, that are all manual for not a lot of money. And you can do a lot with just a light stand, an umbrella, and a little speed light. It gives you a lot more options for making more dynamic portraits. And even you can do action shots with those with that gear. I've spent most of my career, when I needed to light something, with really basic tools that weren't that expensive. And then as you learn those really basic tools and really, the less expensive speed lights, then you can work your way up to bigger mono lights, or kind of the bigger studio lights with the big battery pack. Kind of the sky is the limit. Obviously, if you have enough light, you can, you can overpower the sun. And maybe that's what your goal is. But if you start with a reflector, work your way up to like a small speed light, then to like a studio light, all of those things function the same way. Big light sources create soft light, small light sources create hard light. It's knowing where to throw the light to work for you. So I hope that this is kind of helpful for you to get some context of like some options of things that you could do. With lights, there's definitely a broad variety of things that you could do, but hopefully this gives you kind of a little point of reference of why field lighting is so important.